Aloha! We are talking with Joe and Dean of the Rogers of Samoa. Talofa, Joe and Dean.
Aloha, nice to be here.
How are you guys doing?
Nice to meet you.
We're doing great, thank you. Yeah.
It's so good to finally meet you guys face to face. I feel like I know that we are Facebook friends, and I've been following your films since Kumuhina. And I was just looking through my Google photos of 1 year ago when I was watching Ladies in Waiting, uh, and you guys were on the panel just 1 year ago.
Great, where was that? Where were you, which event were you at?
At Doris Duke.
Oh, excellent. Here.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So can you just share the journey of the film and how you got to making it and what the process was like?
Dean, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, we really started making films in the Pacific 6 or 7 years ago when we met Kumuhina, who's a mahu wahine from Hawaii. And that then led us to make a film about her and about a student of hers. And then we went to Tonga and made a film about a fakaliti in Tonga and also about her student. And so we've been sort of traveling around the Pacific and trying to help people tell their stories and going to a lot of festivals. And one of the questions we got asked the most often is, well, your stories are all about people who were born male but feel that they're female. What about the other thing? What about people that are born female but have an identity that is male? And we're kind of like, I don't know, we just haven't heard that many stories, or it's not as visible, it's not as obvious. And then as we were getting ready to take Ladies in Waiting to Samoa, we heard about this group called the ROGERS. And we're like, oh, I wonder what that's about. And we did a little Facebook sleuthing and talked to a few people that we know in the Fa'afafine Association over there, and a few people in Aotearoa who are from the Samoan community, and found, wow, there's actually an organized group of young Samoans who identify as transgender men. We just thought that was really interesting. So we decided to take our cameras along with us when we went on the trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so refreshing to see always those stories. And I wonder, because especially with the films that you folks have been making, it makes me wonder, okay, so what is the Fafatama story? Because it's not visible. So it was really refreshing to actually see a film and to see them and all the work they're doing in Samoa.
Yeah, they're carrying a lot on their shoulders. That's, I think, you may have already said what struck you the most, like in the making of such a film, and, why are people like us kind of helping to tell these kind of stories? And for me, I think, as Dean described, the people that we encounter in our work, it happens kind of organically. We're not out seeking to particularly or necessarily tell other people's stories, but kind of because of our own journey in trying to figure out how to be effective storytelling advocates for people like us in the US who may identify in the LGBT spectrum. We have found, since living in the Pacific, that, people who identify in similar ways, while on the one hand may be part of strong efforts to reclaim the culture and language and other ways that their own kind of national identities have been taken from them over the centuries. They often find themselves as outsiders in their own countries too, when it comes to their gender or sexuality. And so in our journeys, we've encountered people who really want to be able to have their voices heard and to have their stories be told so that they can, help to fill out that broader picture of who people like them are, even in their own community. So when we met the Rogers, I mean, it was amazing because they wanted to share, they were in the vanguard, really, in the Pacific, of being, among the first, or if not the first, publicly visible group of Fa'atama, or what, as they call themselves also in international conversations, trans men. They're trying to figure out as they go how to be advocates, but also to be caretakers of people in their own community who, the same story, no matter what city you're in around the world, people get thrown out of their homes, lose their opportunity to get an education, friends, churches exclude them. And so in this case, the Rogers came together to form a community of mutual love and support, and family for each other. So it was really fun to be invited by them to document a little bit about what their daily lives are like.
And what a great time to be there while they're planning their big festival.
Yes, it was wonderful. We've gone to quite a few pageants now, and they're always very festive. And really, the Samoan Fa'afafine Association was one of the largest organizers and originators of that idea, and they still have a really big, spectacular pageant. But what made it so fascinating was that here we have a group of trans men who are now going to play the men's role, so that now you actually have a group of trans men and a group of trans women working together and even dancing together. So it was really a lot of fun, especially when they were practicing their dances, and now, where usually the young girls are going to take the man's role, and it's, they're very distinct gender dances. It's not like everybody is the same. And so you got the young, the Rogers, having the paddle and the fights and everything like that. And then all the Fa'afafine are doing the beautiful female moves. So that was a lot of fun. I think they had a lot of fun practicing as well. And it was a big deal for the Rogers because although they've been going for a year or two now, they're still pretty nervous about what public reception will be. So this was really sort of a coming out party in a lot of ways. And the crowd loved them, and I think there was a lot of goodwill there.
For us, it was also wonderful to witness. Like, it was the Samoa Fa'afafine Association was long headed by somebody named Roger Stanley, just a larger than life figure in Samoa for a lot of reasons, but also as an advocate for the Fa'afafine community. And it was Roger who called upon Ice, who's one of the main characters in the film, The Rogers, to say, I'll support you. Will you help form this community to support the Fa'atama, kind of community as well? And unfortunately, Roger passed away shortly before we started filming. And they were doing this dance at their big, beautiful pageant as a way to honor Rogers. So it becomes quite an emotional experience for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you get to meet Roger?
Unfortunately, no.
No, we lots of pictures and lots of reminiscences and stories about him, but not in person. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I feel so connected to them because we're all in the same book, Samoan Queer Lives.
Yeah.
And so I got to read a lot of their stories. And so it feels like I know them. And so when I see them in these films, I'm like, hey, family.
Oh,
Right.
great. Is that the book with Dan Talapapa and
Yes.
and Yuki and everything? Yeah, they were. Our Yuki was there during the pageant and everything, so that was fun too. And I've talked with Dan a lot about the group.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I saw that they're coming up with a new book.
Yeah, we saw that. That's really wonderful to continue, broadening the storytelling component there.
Yeah. Okay, so would you share some of the most important lessons from your experiences so far? I know you've already shared a few already, but maybe some of the standout, valuable lessons.
Joe, you're good at.
Well, I think for us, or for me at least, the lessons are, ever since we started making these kinds of films now, almost 15 years ago, it's, never stop, you know, sharing the voices of people who aren't not only not included, but are excluded often from, you know, the life of their communities. As we've traveled, whether it was with the Kumahina film or Ladies in Waiting, you know, with the ROGERS now, it never ceases to amaze me the number of people in audiences, even in this case, Pacific Islander audiences, who know these people personally. They'll stand up after the film and say, "Oh, Joey or Hina, I've known and admired you for so long and you're so strong, but I had no idea that's what your experience was like." And so it's just a revelation every time that as much as we think people know and see of our various communities, there's so much more, you know, for people to know, to be able to understand fully, you know, what's happening and what we all can do to try to improve things.
Yeah. And I think for me, what's been interesting is that as somebody who comes from a sort of science background, you know, we always have this feeling that the way that we think about gender is like the way that gender is. And it really takes meeting and experiencing life from a different angle to understand that really that's just the way you define it, and other people define it according to their own experiences and their own societies, and that really can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that especially in the sense of Fatima and the ROGERS, in that I think even just when I was growing up as a young gay man, you know, the idea of transgender woman was something that was truly like foreign. Like there might be 1 out of a million people that was like that. It was just, you know, maybe Joan of Arc or some historical figure, but it wasn't like a real thing. And now you look today, and if you live in some places, it's like, well, are there any cis men? So obviously it's not something that's nearly as fixed as we assumed for a really long time. And that's important, not so much just for us to understand, people, but also because that's to understand that actually the whole world is like that, and that there's a lot more going on than we sometimes give credence to from however we happen to have been raised up. So I think that's a good thing.
One last thing, Kiana, I might share is just the, you know, you never underestimate the power of speaking out. And, you know, in this case with the ROGERS, you know, we go through a very in-depth process with people who first, you know, have the courage to say, I want to share my story, you know, in front of a camera. But then what happens when that becomes viewable to people, you know, in the larger world? And so in this case, you know, they rightfully had trepidations about what could happen once their stories became public, and, you know, will there be backlash, etc. So it was really, I think, a challenge and scary for them to take that step, but they did it recently in sharing this via the Coconut TV, which is a wonderful, you know, Pacific platform for sharing Pacific stories. And so it was shared there for the past maybe month or so, I think. And we were all kind of ready, the folks in Samoa and our friends in Aotearoa who put it up, and we were monitoring it closely, like, okay, if any, you know, comments or negativity comes up, how are we going to deal with it, etc. And, you know, the video is shared and viewed by, I don't know, I think close to 100,000 people in just a short number of days. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. I think almost universally positive. And I just think it's a great example again of, you know, those people who have the courage to put their feet, you know, and their voice out there first. It's tough, but boy, the rewards are wonderful, which isn't to say they're not going to face hard times, but they're making it possible for so many other people to see that there is a lot of support and love out there. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, let's move on to my next question, which you kind of already touched on, is the question about identity and language, because Samoa has Fa'afafine, Fatama, the Fakalete of Tonga, Mahu of Hawaii, and then in the West we have all of these other labels and languages. And so I'm curious to know what your relationship is between individual identity and language, and maybe that's changed over your time making these films.
Well, I think for us, the overriding principle is that people, of course, deserve to be identified as they wish to be identified, because it's their identity, not ours. And so that's absolutely paramount. But you hit on a very interesting topic, which is that when we first met Kumukina, her identifying as Mahu was very important part of her identity, because she really identifies primarily as a Hawaiian, as a Kanaka Maoli. That's her primary identity. And then the gender part of it is a part of it. But she's like, just like you'd be a Hawaiian man or a Hawaiian woman with the Hawaiian first, she's a Hawaiian Mahu. And then, of course, as we learned that there was this long tradition and culture of accepting gender fluidity in Hawaii, that was really important, because that's not true in most of the world. So it was not just important for her identity, it was important for the identity of everybody in Hawaii and everybody in the diaspora, really key. So frankly, we were a little surprised when we heard the ROGERS really calling themselves trans men. And they're pretty insistent about that. They like to be called trans men. And they're, you want to be really careful about pronouns in English. In Samoan, there's not, I guess, he and she, but in English, obviously there is. So they were quite insistent. And from what I understand from what they told us, the reason is that in Samoa, the idea of fa'atama, they're still seen as women, essentially. Maybe butch woman or tough woman, but those are women. And they really identify as male. Their core being is male. And the only way to say that was to use the English term trans male. And so that's really important to them, because it's not, their traditional culture has rejected them. They're rejected from church, rejected from their village councils, and they want to be accepted, but they want to be accepted as men. So that's a word that they actually really like people to use. And of course, that's obviously became part of the movie. And it was, yeah, I just think it's, we can't make a one pat rule for everybody. Like not all indigenous people get treated the same, just like not all Western people get treated the same. Each group has their own history and their own identity and everything behind that. Yeah.
And I think it evolves too. In the case of these groups in the Pacific, when you don't have necessarily support and inclusion in your own community, you're often looking for allies who are facing similar issues and struggles in other places. And so in the case of the Pacific, there are a couple different orgs, but the Pacific Sexual and Gender Diversity Network has emerged over the past several years, and it's uniting groups across the Pacific Islands who are fighting for rights and visibility and protections in the gender and sexual minority spectrum. So as they come together, and then those groups even participate in broader international dialogues, on human rights and all kinds of things. And I guess there's a seeking of what's the kind of common, language, nomenclature we're going to use. And, for better or worse, I guess LGBTQ has become the dominant language. And I guess that can be sometimes restrictive, but I think in the best sense, especially when Pacific communities are using it themselves, then it helps them fit into, a larger conversation that's taking place and articulate important and advocate for important rights, in their home context. So I think it's interesting to see how people are fluidly moving across these different kind of borders and using different words and language when it suits the appropriate context.
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I was, thanks for bringing that up because I did notice that they call themselves trans men, and they seemed pretty, like that's what they wanted to be called. And so I thought that was really interesting, that stood out. Thanks for I did telling her audience in the panel I watched, part of the Honolulu Biennale, the 2017 Biennale, where both she and Yuki were part of this panel. And I remember them talking about how their culture came first, her Hawaiianness came first. And that really resonated with me. And it was nice to hear that coming from her. It was a little validating for myself.
Right. Yeah.
So my last question is, what's on the horizon for you both? And by the way, congratulations on Kapai Mahu.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So fortunately, I guess, whatever, luckily, it just turns out that our new projects are all animation projects. So they can actually be done without human contact, which is, this right now, unfortunately, is a good thing. One of them, and both of them revolve around legends or mo'olelo in Hawaiian, stories from the past, stories from pre-colonial times. One of them is called Kapai Mahu, and it's about these 4 big boulders sitting in the middle of Waikiki Beach, right in the middle of what's usually all the tourist madness, that harbor the spirits of these 4 healers who brought the healing arts from Tahiti. And those healers were Mahu. They were a mixture of male and female, which is part of what made them such great healers. And the stones have been there for centuries. They got buried under a bowling alley and all types of disrespected. They're back up there now, but the true story behind them has been hidden and altered, and the Mahu and the gender part sort of squeezed out of the story. So we've been working with Kumuhina to resurrect that important mo'olelo and to bring it back through animation. And then it's going to become a large exhibition at the Bishop Museum, which will open in 2022. So hopefully by that time, visitors will be coming back to Hawaii and we'll be able to learn about the important contribution of Mahu to health and society through those stones. Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, no, I think you captured it great. And it's just for us, we feel really lucky that this is a continuation of the kind of collaboration that makes these projects possible. So Hina, when we first met Hina, when we were filming that film, Kumuhina, she told us the stories about those stones, and it lived in our minds for a long time. And now here 8 years later, we're still collaborating with Hina. She's, telling that mo'olelo or that story in the Ni'ihau dialect, the way that, she and others, believe that it might have, been heard prior to Western contact. So it'll be fun for viewers and listeners to hear that when they get to see it. Collaborating with the support of Pacific Islanders of Communications that works really hard to develop Pacific storytelling, art and artists. So it's just, for us, we feel really honored to be able to do this kind of work with folks like that, to bring it to the Bishop where, it can be used as a tool for young people and educational activities, people to see and hear these stories in new and profound ways, to continue to bringing these things to light, that have been, suppressed here in a tourist-driven economy for so long.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm looking forward to watching Kapai Mahu. And that's all I had for today. Are there any last words, last inspirations that you would like to share with the audience or artists of today?
Well, to any artists, storytelling artists that might be watching today, you know, this is obviously a challenging time. We're all still, I think, trying to figure out how we're going to be coming together, you know, in the film festival and other spaces to make sure that these kinds of stories find a home. So we're looking forward to seeing what kind of creativity emerges, you know, in this time. You know, don't give up. Just look for new ways to do things.
Exactly.
Well, mahalo nui, Joe, Dean. That's all we have for today. Be sure to watch Born This Way, Alwa's Story, and The Rogers when it comes out on the current season of Pacific Heartbeat on World Channel. It will play with another great film. No, I already mentioned that. Both will air in the US on June 15th, June 16th, and June 21st. Check your local TV listings for showtimes. And for more information on visual communications, please check out the website vcmedia.org.
All right. Mahalo. Thanks for your work.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui.
Take care.